Hello, my name is Nathaniel Haywood, and this is my video presentation for Communications 550. The topic that I have selected is the expectancy value theory, and I've discussed things regarding its history, done a literary review about it and its efficiency, along with citing multiple different biblical references to see how does this quality work, especially in the biblical settings, and I followed it with personal application at the end. So I have slides available, and the first slide is as follows: is my thesis statement regarding the presentation. While Joseph Chesbrough and James McCorsky primarily provide these theories and ideas related to motivating students, this paper will assess the constructs of the expectancy value theory and deduce how they can be most effective in a newsroom riddled with young, unmotivated journalists. It's my dream to go into the field of journalism one day, and I've worked with journalism students currently, and I have noticed a lack of motivation for whatever reasons. And this theory would take those students, and sometimes myself, place me in a real world situation, and see how the theory would apply. So the next slide rather, talks about our literary review, pretty much defining the theory and providing information about it. There are many definitions of this theory, as there are with many communication theories. However, the one that I used for this presentation belonged to Alan Wigfield and Jacqueline Eccles from the 2000 publication. The definition that I use essentially says an individual's choice, persistence, and performance can be explained by their beliefs about how well they will do on the activity and to the extent in which they value the activity. So that is a definition that I have used. The two authors have said in their publication that this is kind of a blend of other definitions, but those are the ones that I was able to find. And as the slide says, or would suggest, this is a modern version of John Atkinson's model from 1957. The next slide talks about the two key variables in the expectancy value theory. One, expectancy. Two, value. Expectancy, there are two forms of expectancy. There's efficacy, which is the form of expectancy that we will primarily be discussing in this presentation. Efficacy expectancy is the conviction that one can successfully execute the required behavior to produce outcomes. So it's essentially saying how much someone believes he or she can carry out the task at hand. The next form of expectancy is outcome expectancy. This is a person's estimate that a given behavior will lead to certain outcomes. So essentially this is saying that someone's believing that them doing this task will lead to something good in the future. And the next component of the expectancy value theory is value. And this is defined by the same theorist as they're able to affect a person's definition of a situation so that some objects, activities, and potential outcomes are perceived as having positive valence, essentially they become attractive, while others have a negative valence. They become aversive or less attractive. Similar to expectancy, there were more than one forms of value, and Jacqueline Eccles has also provided 4 different forms of value that somewhat go along with the theory in place. The four forms of value are as follows: attainment, intrinsically, utility, and cost. Attainment value is essentially the importance of doing well on a given task. Intrinsic value is the enjoyment one gains from doing the task. Intrinsic value is important, according to Eccles, because psychological consequences for them can be quite positive. So there's a positive feeling in carrying out the task, and hence value to it. There's utility. Utility value or usefulness refers to how a task fits into an individual's plans. For instance, taking a math class to fulfill a requirement for a science degree, or in our situation, taking a leadership course in a master's program focusing on communication and leadership. And the final form of value, the one that we're most familiar with, is cost. How much will something cost me? To how the decision to engage in one activity limits access to other activities. Assessments of how much effort will be taken to accomplish the activity and its emotional cost. So how much time will it cost you? How much physical activity will it cost you? How much emotion will it cost you? These are the four definitions of value that I have used in this paper. The next slide are pretty much the examples that I found of this theory used in some way or form in Scripture. Now, there are three that I used in this paper, but for the slide, for the sake of time, I used two because the third one could use some convincing, and I'll talk about it for a little bit. The first is Moses. Moses, for those who do not know the story of Moses, he was born a slave, an Israeli slave. At the time, the Israelites were enslaved by the Pharaoh in Egypt. This was the case for studies show for a very long time, over a couple hundred years. He was rescued by his mother, as in the time there was an attempt to kill all the male babies of the Israelites because they were just growing at a pace that the Egyptians could not handle. He was saved by his mother and subsequently became Egyptian royalty. That's a whole other story. He fled Egypt after killing an Egyptian official who was beating an Israeli slave. And so this is where the theory comes into place. God called Moses to go save the Israelites. He called them through a burning bush, one of the most famous stories in Scripture, called through a burning bush to go and save my people from Egypt. He told them to go to Pharaoh, let my people go. And Moses was not having it. As the slide suggests, he had low efficacy expectancy. He feared his speech impediment would prevent anyone from even listening to him. And he was afraid of going back to the place in which he was a wanted man for killing somebody. He didn't believe he could carry out the task, which means he had low efficacy expectancy, therefore decreasing his motivation substantially. The next one is a bit of a reach, maybe. I said maybe he has a low value because he was never a slave. From birth, he became Egyptian royalty. Now this can be refuted because he did kill the Egyptian who was beating the Israeli slave. However, it's hard to tell how much he truly valued their freedom at the time. He maybe valued it, but his low efficacy expectancy was preventing him from doing anything about it. So next slide is about how all this changed after God intervened, after God appeared in the burning bush. And this, things changed, obviously. There was an assurance that God was going to be with Moses as he carried out this task, which I believe increased his efficacy expectancy. And as a man of God, he values things God values. And so his values became in place. So that being said, according to the expectancy value theory, with an increase in expectancy, along with values revolving around the topic, he was motivated to carry out the task, and he delivers the Israelites. The second story is of a similar foundation. Gideon. According to Gideon, the book of Judges, he was the weakest in his family, and his clan was one of the weakest. However, God called him to deliver the Israelites, and judges at the time were men or women who delivered Israel from the oppressors at the time while teaching them about why God allowed this to happen. So the difference between these two is that I believe that Gideon had, in fact, a high value in this matter. When God appeared to Gideon, the first thing Gideon said was, if you're here, if you are this mighty God, why are your people being oppressed by the Midianites at the time? So the first thing he said to God, of all people, was, why are my people enslaved? So that's clearly where his value was. He wanted the liberation of his people. But there was a low efficacy expectancy. Again, as I mentioned earlier, when God said, you're going to be my warrior, he was like, I'm too little, I'm too small, I'm too weak. But the next slide, just as Moses, God intervened, his efficacy expectancy heightened, and his values were already in place, which means the motivation was there. He went from saying, I don't think I can do this, to, God has handed the Midianites to our hands. He said that in the very next chapter. And he too delivers the Israelites. So that's kind of where I will conclude this presentation. Thank you for your time. I hope that you have learned something about this theory and that how it has spiritual implications. And I'd be surprised to see how you all's theories have spiritual implications as well. Thank you.